Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the universal, the strange, and the slightly uncanny, and put them under the highest-powered microscope. Today, we are wrestling with a concept that every single person who has ever lived with a dog has pondered, usually in a dark corner of their house at 3 a.m. We're talking about those gut-wrenching, puzzling moments when your loyal companion seems to see, hear, or just know something you absolutely cannot.
We're exploring those classic scenarios, aren't we? The low, guttural growl directed not at a shadow, but at a seemingly friendly, smiling stranger.
Exactly. Or the intense, focused barking at an empty stretch of hallway.
Yeah, or maybe the most powerful one, when your dog just plants itself directly between you and another person, acting as this, rigid, furry barrier, hackles raised.
Declaring completely nonverbally danger approaches. These anecdotes, they all point us toward this fascinating and, let's be honest, slightly chilling question. Can dogs sense evil?
And our deep dive today is going to treat this question with the seriousness it deserves. We're not resorting to sensationalism. We're synthesizing the robust science of canine perception with millennia of observed instinct.
Our mission is centered on honoring the truly remarkable depth of their perception and that protective bond we share.
Right. We've pulled together research touching on neurology, endocrinology, social behavior, to really try and unravel this phenomena.
But we have to clarify something right up front, don't we?
We do. Evil is a uniquely human moral construct.
Yeah.
Dogs don't attend philosophy class.
Right. They don't assess intent in terms of good versus bad or right versus wrong. It's not like that.
Not at all. But what they do detect are these subtle physiological shifts that signal danger or aggression or acute stress in another being. And these are signals that are completely invisible to us.
So that instinctual reaction to a threat, that's what our human brains translate into this idea of sensing evil.
Precisely. It's an awareness born of thousands and thousands of years of coevolution. Their sensory input is so vast, so refined, that they're our most powerful allies in detecting threats that exist just outside our own perceptual boundary.
They're like the nonverbal canary in the coal mine.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Tuned specifically to human emotional volatility.
And if you listen to nothing else today, this is the core idea we need to unpack. Your dog's nose knows more than just treats and walks. It might actually be able to sniff out hostile intent.
Let's get into exactly how that's chemically possible.
Okay, so where do we start?
We absolutely must begin with olfaction, with smell, because the scientific data supporting their sensory superiority is it's staggering.
Right.
When people talk about a dog's sixth sense, they're often just, completely underselling the power of their first sense.
And the numbers really bear this out. I mean, we are talking about dogs possessing up to 300 million olfactory receptors.
Right, and just to put that in perspective for you, a human typically manages around, 6 million?
6 million. It's a 50-fold difference in just the sheer hardware.
It is. And it goes deeper than just the number of receptors, though. It's about how that data is processed.
Yeah.
You consider the actual architecture of the canine brain. The part of their brain that's dedicated to analyzing odors, the olfactory bulb, is proportionally about 40 times larger than it is in us.
Wow, 40 times.
Their entire world is built around scent.
So their neural processing power for smell is just immense. But I read that they have a secondary dedicated scent system that we barely even have. Is that right?
That's the crucial piece of the puzzle. They possess the vomeronasal organ, often called Jacobson's organ.
Okay.
It's located just above the roof of the mouth. And this organ is specifically wired to detect pheromones and these high molecular weight chemical signals.
Scents that aren't even really smells in the way we think of them.
Exactly. This is a dedicated channel for complex chemical communication. And that includes the subtle hormonal outputs that signal a person's intent.
Okay, so this is where we bridge the gap. We go from pure biology to actually detecting intent. When a person is feeling intense negative emotion, malicious intent, acute anxiety, rage, what is their body physically releasing that a dog can pick up on?
They're releasing stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline.
Fight or flight chemicals.
The very same. These hormones are secreted into the bloodstream, and their byproducts are released really rapidly through sweat, through breath, just general skin off-gassing. These are genuine, quantifiable chemical signals.
And the dog's nose, especially with that special organ.
The vomeronasal organ, yeah. It is exquisitely tuned to detect these minute chemical shifts.
So it's not just a faint scent, it's a chemical spike, a sudden change in that person's chemical profile.
A huge change.
So if someone is trying to project calm on the outside, they're smiling and using friendly social cues, but internally they are stressed or fearful or actively aggressive, their body chemistry immediately gives them away.
It's a real-time hormonal radar. That's a critical distinction. And the research here has moved beyond just theory.
Right. The sources highlight a 2019 study published in the Journal of Veterinary Dermatology. This research specifically set out to quantify the link between human stress markers and how dogs behave.
Okay, so how do they even do that?
Yeah.
It sounds like it would be a real challenge to isolate the scent from all the other cues, like visual or auditory ones.
It was really ingenious, actually. Researchers collected scent samples, usually sweat from the armpits or breath samples, from people who were put into stressful situations.
And they made sure it was genuine stress.
Oh, yeah. They measured it physiologically, heart rate, elevated cortisol levels in their saliva. Then, they took those scent samples and presented them to dogs in a controlled lab setting without the human subject actually being there.
Ah, so they completely removed the possibility of the dog reacting to a scowl or a tense posture.
Exactly.
They were reacting to pure chemistry on a piece of cloth. That's it. And the findings were stark. The dogs reacted much more defensively, meaning they showed more vigilance, their heart rate increased, they tried to avoid the sample. Some even gave low warning growls to the scent samples from the people with demonstrably elevated cortisol levels.
That's powerful validation.
It is. It established a clear, measurable link between the chemical markers of stress and the dog's perception of a threat or, at least discomfort.
It confirms that the scent of intense negative emotion, the chemical signature of aggression or fear, is a real detectable signal for them.
No question.
So for you listening, what are those subtle observable warning signs when a dog catches this unpleasant chemical signal from a stranger?
They often start really small. You want to look for the ears to be pinned back or maybe constantly flicking, like they're trying to process where the signal is coming from.
And the tail.
The tail, even if it was loose and happy a moment ago, might become lowered or tucked. That's a classic sign of conflict or stress. But maybe the most reliable sign is a sudden refusal to approach the individual.
Or even trying to move around them in a wide arc. I've seen that.
Yes, that's a big one.
I've also read that intense sniffing isn't always just curiosity in this context. It can be a sign of distress.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
If they start to sniff the air intensely or engage in that rapid, shallow panting, it's often called air scenting, they're trying to confirm the source of that high cortisol signal.
They're gathering more data.
Sometimes they'll even start circling, trying to get downwind of the person to get the full scent profile. It's a silent alert system that tells us something is chemically off with that interaction.
And this incredible capability isn't just about detecting, criminal intent. The source material reminds us that dogs use this emotional radar in much broader, often helpful ways.
They do. The mechanism is generalized. Dogs use these subtle chemical signals to sense illness and profound emotional distress in other animals and in us.
This has to be the basis for a lot of service dog roles.
It is. It's the physiological basis.
Yep.
They're trained to respond to the onset of a panic attack or an emotional breakdown or even some epileptic seizures by detecting those exact same underlying hormonal spikes that happen right before the event.
They are truly living emotional barometers.
Absolutely.
So we start with the nose, this vast chemical detection system. But a dog isn't just a mobile nose. It's integrating all of the sensory data. Let's move from the purely chemical to the integrated sensory input. How they combine smell with sight and sound to get that holistic judgment we call a vibe or energy.
This is where we really move into the realm of true emotional intelligence. I mean, the anecdotal evidence is just overwhelming. People consistently report their dogs reacting intensely to individuals who might outwardly seem friendly but emit what owners call negative energy.
Right.
And that suggests the dog is making a holistic assessment that goes way beyond just scent.
Okay, but I think we need to challenge that idea of energy a little bit. How do we know the dog is reacting to the person's internal state and not just reflecting our own low-level unconscious anxiety about the social situation?
That's a critical question. And it's why researchers focus on the physiological and behavioral cues the dog shows, even when the owner is trying to stay neutral.
I see.
And while dogs absolutely read and mirror our emotional climate, studies show they also get anxious in environments where no one is overtly distressed, but the microexpressions and the body postures of others signal tension.
So they're sensitive to that. That ambient, unacknowledged human tension in a room.
Very sensitive. They act as emotional mirrors, reflecting the hidden stress.
So what are they looking for visually? What are the tells?
They are masters of reading microexpressions.
Okay, what are those exactly?
These are fleeting facial expressions that last only a fraction of a second. They're often too fast for us to consciously notice, but they betray genuine emotion. And dogs, whose visual systems are highly attuned to motion and changes in contour, are excellent at catching these quick signals.
And the research backed this up, right? Their ability to connect faces with feelings.
Yes. There was landmark research from Emory University that confirmed dogs process human faces in a specialized part of their brain, very similar to our own,
So they can recognize individual faces.
and critically associate those faces with specific emotional states based on their past experiences with that person or that expression.
So when they're assessing a potential threat, what specific facial signals are they reacting to?
They are hyper-attuned to the signs of impending aggression. The subtle tightening around the mouth, the scowls, the glares, or a tense jawline.
To a dog, those aren't just benign visual cues.
Not at all. They are evolutionary warnings of potential conflict. If they see a person's face shift from relaxed to rigid, they interpret that rigidity as a step toward hostility.
And what about the eyes?
Oh, the eyes are paramount. Dogs are highly, highly aware of eye contact.
Yeah.
A prolonged, unwavering stare is a universal threat signal, both in the canine world and, in the early human world.
So they're watching the eyes very closely.
Very closely. They're looking for dilation or a hardness in the gaze. And depending on their own training and instinct, they might either break that gaze quickly to avoid conflict or return it aggressively as a challenge.
Okay, let's talk about sound, because that input has to be instantaneous. We know they prioritize tone, but just how sophisticated is their detection of our vocal changes?
It's extremely sophisticated. See, dogs process our speech on two separate tracks. They analyze the words, which they can learn to associate with meaning, but they dedicate a huge amount of processing power to the paralinguistic cues.
So the pitch, the frequency, the rhythm.
Exactly. The cadence, the amplitude of the voice,
Cool.
all of it.
So they hear the emotional content first before the words even register.
They do. A harsh, clipped, or a suddenly high-pitched voice instantly registers as anxiety or aggression, no matter what words are being used.
So you could say, "I love you," in an aggressive tone.
And the dog's emotional radar would just scream, conflict. They react really strongly to that inconsistency between the verbal content and the vocal tone, which is often a very strong indicator of deceit or suppressed anger.
Fascinating. So moving to the full body assessment, how do they interpret physical cues like posture and movement when they're trying to figure out if there's danger?
They look for tension and size projection, a sudden looming posture, a rigid spine, or clenched fists. These are textbook signals of imminent danger.
Things we do unconsciously when we're hostile.
Exactly. And dogs detect this rigidity instantly. And that triggers their own protective mechanisms, which often manifests as what we call blocking behavior.
Can you elaborate on that? Blocking behavior, I think a lot of owners see it but don't realize what it means.
So blocking behavior is when the dog deliberately places its body between the owner and the person they perceive as a threat. They are physically intercepting the path of interaction.
It's not accidental.
Not at all. It's a conscious decision rooted in loyalty and protection. The dog is literally saying, "You have to go through me." They might sit on your feet, or stand stiffly by your leg, or even try to nudge you backward while they face the person.
This all suggests this immense, innate instinct, but our sources really stress the role of experience in refining all this. It's not just born, it's learned.
That's the critical overlay. A dog raised in a purely calm, stable home might have a high baseline sensitivity, sure, but a dog that grew up in a chaotic, abusive, or just highly tense home develops hypervigilance.
They become survivors.
They are survivors. They learn very early on that their safety, and maybe the safety of their human family, depended on accurately predicting the next outburst. So they become hyper-aware of the most minute shifts, a tightening of the lips, a quick shift in weight, a sudden drop in vocal tone. They build this emotional map based on past trauma, which makes them incredibly sophisticated, though often anxious judges of human character.
So their individual history really determines their emotional baseline and how sensitive they are. That explains why a rescue dog might be much, much faster to react to a sudden movement than a dog raised in a very low-stress suburban home.
Exactly. The low-stress dog might interpret a sudden movement as, potentially exciting. The hypervigilant dog interprets it as potentially life-threatening.
And this combination of instinct and learned experience, that leads us right into how breed differences can further influence their protective response.
It does.
So let's explore that. How does breed influence this complex protective equation? We know a border collie is going to see the world very differently than a Doberman.
Absolutely.
Oh.
The breed's original purpose shapes how they filter and respond to all these emotional cues. Their genetic predisposition is paramount.
So if we look at the protective working breeds,
The German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Rottweilers, Dobermans, they were specifically bred for guardianship. Their genetics favor a very strong drive to identify and neutralize threats.
so they have a lower threshold for what they consider suspicious behavior?
A much lower threshold.
Yeah.
And they often default to confrontation or a very firm warning.
And what do studies suggest about how their warning signs actually look?
In these protective breeds, the warning signs are often stronger and earlier. They'll go stiff almost immediately. They use these intense, low-frequency growls, and their blocking behavior is very deliberate and physical.
It's that heightened emotional attunement to danger that makes them so effective in police or military work.
That's right. They're sensing the threat before the average human even really registers the person's presence.
But let's contrast that with a different kind of working dog, say a border collie bred for herding. If a border collie senses a threat, how might their reaction be different from a German shepherd's?
That's a great example of how purpose dictates the response. A border collie's instinct is to control and move things, whether it's the threat or the flock.
Okay.
So if they sense discomfort or anxiety in a person, they might try to herd the owner away from the source of that discomfort. They might nip at your heels or circle anxiously.
They're less likely to do that heavy confrontational blocking.
Right. Their response is built around subtle management and repositioning. It's fascinating.
They use the tools they were bred for. That makes perfect sense. Now let's talk about detecting shifts in familiar people. Because it's not just strangers they can read.
Not at all. This is where their role as emotional mirrors becomes intensely personal. They're so attuned to their owner's baseline emotional state.
So if they detect a sustained negative shift,
Like chronic stress or simmering anger or profound sadness, in a person they know well, they absolutely alert the owner. They might whine or push their nose into the owner's hand or even try to disrupt the behavior that's associated with that negative state.
and this capability is based on accumulated emotional memory. They know what's normal for you, and they can instantly recognize when you're deviating from that norm.
Precisely. They remember past interactions and use that long-term memory to interpret new emotional data. If they smell a consistently high level of cortisol on their owner day after day, they know that energy is either dangerous or needs intervention.
It signals a profound understanding of their owner's inner life.
It really does.
And this loyalty and vigilance also leads to their protective instincts toward the most vulnerable among us, which we see in some pretty profound real-life case studies.
Yes. The protective instinct toward children, the elderly, or those with mobility issues is incredibly powerful. They display this deep, intuitive understanding of fragility.
They'll often position themselves not just between the threat and the owner, but specifically between the threat and the child.
Which suggests an empathetic recognition of the vulnerable person's inability to defend themselves.
And we have a very important and very powerful case study here from the sources regarding domestic abuse that really highlights this learned protective intervention.
This is sobering, but it's essential data. The 2023 study from the ASPCA documented the behavior of dogs in households experiencing domestic violence.
And the findings.
They were unambiguous. These dogs exhibited hypersensitivity to escalating aggression.
So how did that sensitivity show up, specifically in the presence of the abuser?
They weren't just generally anxious. Their behavior was often targeted and proactive. They would become hypervigilant, watching for the earliest signs of conflict, the shift in tone, the sudden rigid posture of the abuser.
And during actual confrontations.
They frequently intervened. This could mean physically placing themselves between the abuser and the victim, often the most vulnerable family member, or using sustained, specific barks directed solely at the aggressor as a warning or a deterrent.
That's incredible. The dog is essentially calculating the threat level and choosing the safest way to intervene.
It's a profound example of learned, protective intelligence honed under intense stress. Their behavior, the attempts to block doors, the targeted barking, it's not just raw instinct. It's a refined protective mechanism designed to shield those they see as unable to fight back.
And dogs rescued from those situations often carry that heightened empathy forward.
They do. They often become intensely loyal and protective in their new, safer homes.
And stepping back into the everyday, those protective instincts show up even in mundane social settings, right? Where dogs are acting as our personal social filters.
Absolutely. And you have to trust these signals. If you are walking through a park or sitting at a cafe and your dog, with no obvious provocation, suddenly strains at the leash, pulls away from an approaching individual, refuses a treat, or starts those low, suspicious growls.
That is a critical data point.
It's a huge data point. It signals their discomfort or distrust is acute, even if the person seems superficially charming. They are signaling, I detect volatility here.
So the immediate response shouldn't be to correct the dog for, bad manners.
No. It should be to heighten your own observational skills about the person in question. It's a cue to practice heightened caution. Your dog has given you sensory input you missed.
Okay, now let's just so they learn to identify the transition points.
Exactly. The moment an actor shifts from just casual conversation to aggressive movement. This teaches them to react immediately, barking, blocking, holding their ground, only when the intention is hostile, rather than reacting to every loud voice or quick gesture.
So it's not just teaching them to bite, it's teaching them to wait for the clear signal of malice before they act.
Precisely. It refines their trigger point based on intent, not just noise.
And contrast that with therapy roles where the goal is totally different.
Completely different. It's all about emotional awareness and comfort. Therapy dogs are trained to recognize the earliest physiological and auditory signs of anxiety, panic, or emotional dysregulation.
The rapid heart rate, the vocal tremors.
The scent of a panic-induced cortisol spike. All of it. They're essentially trained to be hyper-empathetic and proactive to preempt a breakdown.
So their training teaches them specific, calm, intervening behaviors.
It does. Like leaning into a person, resting their chin on a lap, or just maintaining that comforting physical contact. They're using their natural sensitivity to provide stability, often alerting caregivers to an emotional crisis before the handler is even aware it's happening.
And underpinning both of those specialized fields is just the general concept of experiential learning.
It's the foundational database. Repeated exposure to a vast range of people, environments, and situations helps dogs refine their intuitive responses.
So they learn through association.
Exactly. Which types of energy, posture, or tone have historically led to discomfort or danger. This emotional memory allows their intuition to evolve into a highly reliable skill set for social assessment.
Okay. Now we have to transition to the realm that gives this whole topic its spine-tingling reputation. The behavior that defies easy scientific explanation. The persistent barking at empty corners, the refusal to enter certain rooms. This is where we confront the spiritual and supernatural question.
This is where the science has to take a bit of a backseat to observation, though science can still offer some pretty compelling possibilities.
So science is skeptical about ghosts, obviously.
It maintains professional skepticism, yes. But we can't deny that dog senses are so acute, they may be picking up on environmental changes that are completely imperceptible to us.
Okay, so what are the most common scientific hypotheses for this kind of behavior? What environmental triggers could be at play?
We're talking about things that register just outside our own perception. Infrasound, for example.
Which is?
Low-frequency sound waves below 20 hertz. They're often produced by natural things like wind or distant earthquakes or even certain structural vibrations in a house. We can't hear them, but they can induce feelings of anxiety and fear in humans and animals.
And dogs are much more sensitive to those frequencies.
Far more sensitive. Also, that they might be sensing minor electromagnetic shifts from faulty wiring or extremely high-frequency sounds from pipes or electronics that we can't hear.
And because the dog reacts so intensely, staring fixedly, low growling, sudden fear, we interpret that as a reaction to an unseen, maybe malevolent presence.
Exactly. It's the closest we get to a scientific explanation for seeing ghosts. They're sensing the physical environment in a way that generates fear, and we project a spiritual meaning onto it.
And their behavior often aligns so perfectly with folklore or reported paranormal activity, which of course just reinforces the cultural idea that they are uniquely sensitive to the spiritual realm.
It does.
And this cultural interpretation of the dog as a sentinel, as a guardian between worlds, has some really deep roots in history and religion.
It absolutely does. The perception of dogs as intuitive spiritual beings spans global mythology. In Greek mythology, you have Cerberus guarding the gates of the underworld, right?
The ultimate threshold guardian.
And the Norse viewed them as guides, which is a slightly softer but equally profound role. They were believed to guide souls into the afterlife, acting as discerning companions who could separate the worthy from the unworthy.
And we see it in other ancient cultures, too.
Oh yes, in ancient Mesopotamian cultures, dogs were seen as protectors against malevolent forces and illness. Even in organized religion, you see this reverence.
In Hinduism, for instance.
In Hinduism, dogs are associated with the fierce guardian deity Bhairava, who protects sacred spaces and wards off negative influences. And in Zoroastrianism, dogs held such high spiritual significance they were included in funeral rites, believed to ward off evil spirits.
These cultural viewpoints really underscore a long-held human need to believe that we have a partner who can perceive threats beyond our capability, a silent guardian.
And that belief system persists today, especially in practices related to energy and healing. Many modern energy healers and spiritual practitioners will observe that dogs intentionally gravitate toward clients who are emotionally depleted, and conversely, they'll avoid individuals carrying heavy, volatile emotional burdens.
They interpret those choices as intuitive assessments of energy and intent.
They do. They use the dog as a sort of natural barometer of spiritual health.
Wow. So we've covered the entire spectrum, from the microscopic detection of cortisol all the way to the mythological belief in guides of the underworld. I think it's time for our final synthesis.
Mhm.
What is the essential, actionable takeaway for you, the listener, when your dog signals a warning?
The final synthesis is this. While the definition of evil remains philosophical, we've definitively established that dogs react profoundly and measurably to energy, emotion, and intent.
And they do it via advanced sensory inputs, hormonal scent, vocal tone, and minute body language cues.
Exactly.
So how does the listener recognize those signs, especially in a high-stakes moment when they really need to trust their dog?
You have to watch for the clustering of sudden, unexplained behavioral changes around a specific person or location. We're talking about trembling, intense clinging to you, a refusal to approach, sudden aggressive barking, or the dog actively putting its body between you and the other person.
These cues are crucial data points.
They are. They signal perceived danger or acute discomfort.
We established that we shouldn't just dismiss the reaction, but we also cautioned against, panicking. That balanced approach seems key.
It is. The healthiest approach is one of balanced curiosity. If you dismiss your dog's reaction, you're ignoring a highly sophisticated sensory system.
Yeah.
You're just discarding valuable data.
But on the other hand,
But jumping to the conclusion of spiritual malice is equally unhelpful. Use the dog's discomfort as a signal for heightened caution, for increased observation, and maybe to have an exit strategy if you need one.
so trust your dog's data and then apply your own human reason to it.
That's the partnership.
And regardless of the exact mechanism, whether it's an overload of cortisol in the air or a reading of subtle environmental shifts, the core motivation is unchanging, isn't it?
The underlying motivation for a dog's warning is universally the desire to protect its beloved family. That action, the warning, the barrier, the bark, is at its core the purest, most profound act of loyalty and love.
That partnership, built on thousands of years of nonverbal empathetic understanding, is what we have to honor. Trusting your dog's intuition is really about trusting that bond.
And that profound trust grants us a remarkable form of protection. It gives us a window into a world of hidden volatility and unseen threats that our own senses just aren't equipped to handle.
We have journeyed deep today, exploring the science of 300 million olfactory receptors, the intricacies of the vomeronasal organ, and the historical context that casts the dog as this eternal guardian. But as we close this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought to carry forward. The next time you encounter a new person, and your dog quietly, subtly shifts their body to plant themselves between you and that person, hair slightly raised, what hidden darkness or discomfort are they sensing that you are simply unable to see?
Pay attention to that moment. It's a reminder of the extraordinary unseen intelligence of the companion sharing your sofa and the depth of the knowledge they hold.
Thank you for bringing your sources to the deep dive. We hope this exploration gives you a profound new appreciation for the extraordinary senses of your canine companion.